Hello and welcome to History and Chill. Imagine you've just woken up on an archipelago at the edge of the known world, a chain of mountainous islands where only a fifth of the land can be farmed, where the sea both isolates and sustains, and where the forests are so dense that even your neighbors feel like distant countries. This is ancient Japan, not the Japan of samurai movies or anime, but the Japan that existed for 14,000 years before the first shogun ever drew a sword. We will travel from a time when people hunted deer with stone-tipped arrows and shaped clay pots with their bare hands, through the arrival of rice and bronze, through the building of massive burial mounds for god-kings, through the first written laws and the golden age of poetry and perfumed robes. But before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's a simple and best way to support the channel and enable me to continue producing these videos. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight, so I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Let us travel back to a time of pit dwellings, sacred mountains, and ink brushed on silk. Your first life begins around 10,000 BCE, in a world without metal, without writing, without agriculture. You are Jomon, a name modern scholars will give your people, meaning cord-marked, after the patterns pressed into your pottery. The islands you inhabit have only recently separated from the mainland. Mammoths still roam the northern reaches. The forests are thick with chestnut, walnut, and oak. Deer and wild boar move through the undergrowth. The rivers churn with salmon in autumn. The coastline, longer than almost any nation's on Earth, offers endless shellfish, fish, and seaweed. You do not farm. You do not need to. The land provides. Your home is a pit dwelling, a hole dug into the earth, covered with a thatched roof supported by wooden posts. The floor is packed dirt, cool in summer, warmed in winter by a central hearth. Smoke rises and seeps through the roof. Your eyes sting, but the fire keeps insects away and preserves the fish hanging above. You make pottery, the oldest pottery in the world, scholars will later determine. You coil ropes of clay, press patterns with twisted plant fibers, and fire the vessels in open pits. These pots store nuts, cook stews, and hold the fermented foods that get you through winter. This is not primitive life. This is a sustainable civilization that will last longer than any empire in human history. Your day begins when grey light filters through the smoke hole. You rise from a bed of deer hides and dried grass. The fire has burned to embers. You blow on them, add kindling, and wait for the flame. Breakfast is yesterday's chestnuts, roasted and stored in a clay jar, and strips of dried salmon you softened overnight in water. The village around you holds perhaps 30 people, extended family mostly. Children run between the pit houses, chasing a dog that arrived generations ago from the continent. Women gather in a circle, grinding nuts on flat stones, their hands calloused and strong. Your task today is fishing. You walk to the shore with a bone hook, a line of twisted plant fiber, and a dugout canoe carved from a single camphor trunk. The sea is calm. You paddle out, drop your line, and wait. The catch is good. Sea bream, mackerel, a small shark. You gut them on the beach and lay them on bamboo racks to dry in the salt wind. By evening, the village gathers. An elder recites the stories of the ancestors, of the spirits that live in the mountains and the rivers, of the great earthquake that swallowed a village 3 generations past. You listen, knowing that one day, if you live long enough, you will tell these stories too. Life is hard but stable. For 10,000 years it will continue this way. And then, everything changes. The Jomon world is alive with spirits. Every mountain has a presence, every river speaks. The great cedar at the village edge has stood for centuries. You leave offerings at its roots before hunting in its shadow. Your people carve small clay figures, dogu, with wide eyes and elaborate patterns across their bodies. Some have swollen bellies, clearly pregnant. Others seem to wear goggles or masks. Scholars will debate their meaning for centuries. You know only that they hold power. When a child falls ill, the healer places a dogu on the child's chest and chants through the night. When the figure cracks, the illness passes into it and breaks. You bury the fragments far from the village. Death is not an ending but a transition. Your dead are buried in the village itself, often beneath the floors of pit houses, curled into the position of sleep. Red ochre covers their bodies, the colour of blood, the colour of life. Stone tools and favourite ornaments accompany them. The boundary between the living and the dead is thin. Your grandmother, buried near the hearth, still watches over the family. You speak to her when the fire crackles at night. Sometimes you believe she answers. Your life follows the turning of the year, each season bringing its own work and its own food. Spring is the lean time. Winter stores run low. You dig for wild roots, lily bulbs, yams, arrowhead tubers, and gather the first green shoots of ferns and bracken. The rivers begin to stir. You repair your fishing weirs, woven from bamboo and stakes, positioned to catch the first runs of sweet fish. Summer brings abundance. The forests fill with berries, shellfish fatten in the warm shallow. You wade through tidal flats, filling baskets with clams, oysters, and sea snails. The midden pile outside the village, generations of discarded shells, grows a little higher. Autumn is the time of plenty and frantic preparation. Salmon crowd the rivers, thick as your arm, fighting upstream to spawn. You catch them by the dozens, smoking and drying them for the months ahead. Chestnuts and acorns fall in heaps. Women work from dawn to dark, grinding, leaching, and storing. Winter closes in. Snow buries the village. You stay close to the fire, carving tools from bone and antler, mending nets, teaching children the songs. Food is carefully rationed. If the autumn harvest was poor, hunger gnaws at your belly by the time spring finally returns. This cycle repeats for 400 generations. Your people never imagine it could end. Around 900 BCE, strangers arrive from the Korean peninsula. They bring bronze, they bring iron, they bring a grain that will reshape your world: wet rice. You watch them from the forest edge, these newcomers with their different faces, their different tools, their different ways. They dig channels from the rivers to flood flat fields. They plant seedlings in neat rows, standing knee-deep in muddy water. They harvest more food from a single field than your people gather from a whole valley in a year. At first there is trade, then intermarriage, then, slowly, absorption. Your grandchildren will not hunt deer, they will plant rice. This is the Yayoi period, named after a district in Tokyo, where archaeologists will first uncover its distinctive pottery, thinner, simpler, made on wheels imported from the continent. The shift is not just technological, it is social. Rice can be stored, rice can be counted, rice can be taxed. Rice can make some people very, very rich, and others very, very poor. The egalitarian villages of the Jomon begin to fracture. Chiefs emerge. Warriors appear. The first walls are built around the first granaries. Japan will never be the same. Your new life is measured in planting and harvest. Spring means standing in flooded paddies, your legs numb from cold water, pushing seedlings into the mud one by one. Your back aches by midday. By evening you can barely straighten. Summer means weeding, endless weeding, pulling unwanted plants from between the rice stalks while mosquitoes feast on your neck and arms. Autumn is harvest, cutting the stalks with stone sickles, later with iron ones when the metal becomes common. You bundle the rice, thresh it against wooden frames, and carry it to the storehouse. Winter means repairs, mending tools, weaving baskets, sharpening blades, and hunger if the harvest was poor. Your home is no longer a pit dwelling, but a raised structure on wooden posts, keeping the floor dry and the grain safe from rats. The village is larger now, 100 people, maybe 200. A wooden palisade surrounds it. Watchtowers stand at the corners. At the center of the village, a storehouse holds the communal rice. The chief controls access to it. When the harvest fails, he decides who eats and who doesn't. You bring him gifts. You bow when he passes. You hope he remembers your name. The new metals change everything. Bronze arrives first, mirrors, bells, weapons. These objects are not made locally. They come from the continent, traded at enormous cost. Only chiefs possess them. A bronze mirror, polished until it reflects your face, is believed to hold the power of the sun. A bronze bell, rung at the proper time, summons the spirits of the harvest. Iron follows, more practical but no less transformative. An iron axe clears forests 3 times faster than a stone one. An iron hoe breaks soil that defeated your ancestors. An iron sword cuts through leather armor as if it were cloth. You are a farmer. You will never own a bronze mirror or an iron sword, but you feel their effects. The chief who controls the trade routes grows powerful. The village that masters ironworking expands. The balance of power shifts. Smiths become important men. Their skills pass from father to son, their forges places of mystery and danger. The transformation of rock into gleaming metal seems like magic. In a sense, it is. The age of stone ends, the age of metal begins. And with metal comes war on a scale your ancestors never imagined. By the first centuries of the Common Era, Japan is a patchwork of warring chiefdoms. Chinese records from this period describe the islands as divided into more than 100 small states, constantly fighting, constantly negotiating. Your chief wears bronze mirrors as symbols of his authority, objects imported at great expense from China, believed to hold spiritual power. He leads warriors armed with bronze swords and halberds, later iron ones. Warfare is brutal and personal. There are no cavalry charges, no massed infantry tactics. Men face each other with spears and clubs in disputes over water rights, rice stores, and honor. The dead are buried with grave goods that mark their rank. A common farmer gets a simple jar. A chief gets bronze weapons, jade ornaments, and the bodies of sacrificed servants. One chiefdom begins to dominate the others. It is based in the Kinai region, the fertile plain around modern Osaka and Nara. Its rulers claim descent from the sun goddess herself. They call themselves Yamato. They will rule Japan, in one form or another, for the next 2,000 years. Chinese records preserve a remarkable account. Around 240 CE, a woman named Himiko rules a confederation of Japanese states. The Chinese call her land Wa, and describe her as a shaman queen who occupied herself with magic and sorcery, bewitching the people. She lives in a heavily guarded palace, attended by 1,000 female servants. Only one man, her brother, is permitted to see her. He communicates her commands to the outside world. You never see her face. No one does. But you know her power. When she speaks through her brother, chiefs obey. When she performs the rituals, the harvests improve, or so you are told. She sends ambassadors to the Chinese court, seeking recognition and alliance. They return with bronze mirrors, silk, and a gold seal naming her Queen of Wa, Friend of Wei. These treasures become sacred objects, proof of her connection to the great civilization across the sea. When Himiko dies, a great mound is raised over her body. 100 attendants are buried with her, sacrificed to serve her in the next world. A male king succeeds her, but the country falls into chaos. Only when another woman, Io, takes the throne does peace return. The age of queen shamans will pass, but the memory lingers in myth and ritual for centuries to come. Around 300 CE, the landscape begins to change. Massive mounds appear across the countryside. Keyhole-shaped earthworks, some stretching hundreds of meters long, surrounded by moats filled with water. These are kofun, the burial tombs of the new elite. You spend months hauling baskets of earth to build one. Thousands of workers labor alongside you, conscripted from villages across the region. The chief who will be buried here is still alive, watching from a palanquin as his final resting place takes shape. The mound is lined with clay figures, haniwa, horses, soldiers, houses, boats, dancers. They will accompany the dead into the next world. Inside the burial chamber, workers install a stone sarcophagus, bronze mirrors, iron weapons, and gilt bronze ornaments. The sheer wealth concentrated in a single grave would feed your village for a decade. This is the Kofun period, and it marks the consolidation of power under the Yamato court. The great chiefs are no longer merely local strongmen. They are connected to a divine lineage. They rule not by strength alone, but by sacred right. You will never see the inside of the tomb. You are allowed only to carry the dirt. The foreman marks your arm with charcoal, a tally of days worked. You arrived 3 weeks ago from your village, one of 40 men conscripted for the project. You sleep in a rough shelter of woven mats. You eat millet gruel twice a day, supplemented by whatever vegetables the overseers provide. The work begins at dawn. You fill baskets with earth from the excavation pit, carry them up wooden ramps, and dump them on the growing mound. Each basket weighs as much as a small child. By midday, your shoulders burn. By evening, you can barely lift your arms. Men from other villages work beside you. You share no language, only exhaustion. A man from the western provinces collapsed yesterday. They carried him to the shelter. This morning, his mat was empty. The mound rises slowly, a handspan each week, measured against a marked pole. The scale is incomprehensible. Generations of your ancestors could have lived and died in the time it takes to build this single grave. When the work is finally done, you walk home with nothing but calloused hands and a story to tell. The lord who rests beneath that mountain of earth will never know your name, but you carried part of him into eternity. By the 5th century, the Yamato state has established control over most of central and western Japan. The court operates from the Kinai region, moving its capital from site to site. Tradition holds that each emperor must establish a new palace, as the old one is polluted by death. The emperor, called Okimi, or Great King at this time, sits at the apex of a hierarchy of clan chiefs. These uji are extended kinship groups, each controlling specific territories and responsibilities. Some manage military affairs, others oversee religious rituals, still others produce craftsmen or scribes. Below the uji are the bei, occupational groups tied to specific tasks. You might belong to a bei of weavers, potters, or farmers, your profession determined by birth, your labor owed to the clan that controls you. The court absorbs ideas and technologies from the continent at a remarkable rate. Scribes arrive from Korea, bringing classical Chinese writing. Craftsmen bring metalworking, silk weaving, and continental architectural styles. Most importantly, Buddhism arrives, and nothing will be the same. The year is 552 CE, according to one traditional account. The king of Baekje, a Korean kingdom, sends an embassy to the Yamato court. Among the gifts are a bronze Buddha statue and a collection of sutras. The emperor is uncertain. This new religion speaks of suffering and rebirth, of karma and enlightenment. It comes with rituals, temples, and a clergy that owes allegiance to texts written in distant India. Two powerful clans divide over the question. The Soga clan, which controls trade with the continent, champions Buddhism. The Mononobe clan, traditional guardians of native Shinto ritual, opposes it. The conflict turns violent. In 587, the Soga triumph. The Mononobe are destroyed. Buddhism is now the religion of the state. You witness temples rising across the land. Wooden structures with curved roofs and vermilion columns, utterly unlike anything your ancestors built. Monks in saffron robes walk the streets, chanting sutras in a language no one understands. You are told the Buddha can relieve suffering. You are told he can grant good harvests, cure diseases, protect the emperor. You light incense at the temple. You still leave offerings for the local kami at the shrine by the river. The two religions coexist, uneasily, complementarily. The bell rings before dawn. You rise from your thin mat in the monk's dormitory, splash cold water on your face, and join the procession to the main hall. 200 monks kneel in rows, their shaved heads bowed. The chanting begins, Sanskrit syllables rendered in Chinese characters, read with Japanese pronunciation. You understand perhaps one word in 10. The meaning, you are told, transcends language. Breakfast is rice gruel with pickled vegetables. Meat is forbidden. So is garlic, onion, and anything that might inflame the passions. Your body feels light, sometimes too light. The day unfolds in ritual and study. You copy sutras with brush and ink, each character a meditation. You memorize texts that fill entire rooms. You debate points of doctrine with fellow monks, arguments that can last for hours over a single phrase. Not all monks are scholars. Some tend the temple gardens. Some manage the temple's extensive land holdings, gifts from aristocrats seeking spiritual merit. Some travel to distant provinces, spreading the faith and collecting donations. You took vows at 15, sent to the temple by parents who could not feed another mouth. The discipline is harsh. The winters are cold. But you eat every day, which is more than many can say. And you are learning to read, a skill that sets you apart from nearly everyone you once knew. The Asuka period, roughly 538 to 710 CE, transforms Japan from a confederation of clans into something resembling a centralized state. The key figure is Prince Shotoku, regent to Empress Suiko. In 604, he issues the 17-article constitution, not a legal code, but a set of moral principles for officials. Harmony, Buddhism, and obedience to the emperor are its core values. He sends embassies directly to China, bypassing Korea, seeking to learn from the Tang dynasty at its height. Scholars and monks return with books, technologies, and ideas about how a proper empire should be governed. In 645, after Shotoku's death, a coup removes the Soga clan from power. The new regime launches the Taika reforms, an ambitious attempt to remake Japan on the Chinese model. All land, the reforms declare, belongs to the emperor. All people are his subjects. A census will register every household. Taxes will be collected uniformly. Officials will be appointed by merit, not birth. On paper, the reforms are revolutionary. In practice, implementation is slow, partial, and constantly resisted by the old clan elites. But the direction is clear. Japan is becoming a state. In 710 CE, Japan builds its first permanent capital at Nara. Modelled on Chang'an, the Tang Chinese capital, Nara is laid out on a precise grid. A great central avenue leads to the imperial palace complex at the north. Buddhist temples cluster in the eastern hills. Markets bustle in designated districts. For the first time, the emperor does not move his palace when death pollutes it. Nara will serve as the capital for 74 years. If you are summoned to the capital as a labourer, you see wonders beyond description. The great Buddha at Todaiji is 16 meters tall, cast in bronze, gilded with gold, the largest bronze statue in the world. Building it nearly bankrupts the state. You also see the other side. Conscript workers die by the hundreds, perhaps thousands, casting the bronze, hauling the timber, digging the foundations. Epidemic diseases sweep through the crowded city. In 737, a smallpox outbreak kills nearly a third of the population. The court compiles the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Japan's first written histories. They trace the imperial line back to the sun goddess Amaterasu. They establish the mythology that will justify imperial rule for over a millennium. You are now officially a subject of the emperor, your household registered, your taxes assessed, your labour available for conscription. The capital overwhelms your senses. You arrived yesterday from your village, a journey of 12 days on foot. The road grew wider as you approached, then suddenly opened into a city larger than anything you imagined possible. The main avenue stretches before you, broad enough for 10 ox carts side by side. Officials in silk robes pass in carriages. Monks in saffron hurry toward the temple district. Merchants call out their wares. Beggars sit against the walls, hands extended. The smell hits you first. Cooking fires, animal dung, incense from the temples, the open sewers that line the smaller streets. Then the noise, hammering from workshops, the chant of sutras, arguments in languages you don't recognize, the constant murmur of 100,000 voices. You are here to deliver your village's tax grain. You find the collection point, wait in line for half a day, surrender your bundle, and receive a wooden tally in return. The official barely glances at you. That night, you sleep in a cheap inn near the Eastern Market, a mat on the floor, shared with a dozen strangers. Someone steals your sandals while you sleep. In the morning, you begin the long walk home, barefoot, carrying stories no one in your village will quite believe. The Ritsuryo system, the legal codes adapted from China, reshapes daily life. In theory, you receive an allotment of land from the state. In exchange, you pay a grain tax, a textile tax, and a labor tax. You may be conscripted for military service or public works projects. The assessment is based on household registers. Officials arrive every 6 years to count heads, record ages, and reassign land based on the number of adult males. In practice, the system is full of gaps. Powerful families find ways to shield their lands from taxation. Buddhist temples accumulate tax-exempt estates through donations. Local officials skim from the assessments. Common farmers flee to the frontiers or sell themselves into dependent status to escape the burden. You work your allocated field, but you also work the private lands of a local magnate in exchange for protection. The line between free farmer and tenant blurs. The capital sends inspectors occasionally. They write reports that describe the situation accurately. Nothing changes. Spring comes, and so does the tax collector. He arrives with a measuring basket and a ledger. He counts your household, yourself, your wife, 2 surviving children, your elderly mother. He calculates your obligation, so many bushels of rice, so many lengths of cloth, so many days of labor. The rice tax is manageable in good years. The cloth tax is harder. Your wife spends weeks at the loom producing rough hemp fabric that barely meets the standard. The labor tax is worst. Every adult male owes days of service on roads, canals, or government buildings. The work site may be a week's walk away. You bring your own food. If you fall sick, you work anyway or face penalties. Some years, there is also military conscription. You train with a spear, march in formation, and stand guard at a fort on the western coast, watching for invasions that rarely come. By the time you pay your taxes, surrender your labor, and set aside seed rice for next spring, you have barely enough to survive. You eat millet porridge and wild vegetables. Meat is a memory. This is the Nara system at its peak. It will not last. Your diet is simple, repetitive, and often insufficient. Rice is the ideal, the food of the gods and the aristocracy. But you eat it rarely. Most of your harvest goes to taxes and landlords. What remains is stretched with millet, barley, and foxtail grain, coarser, less satisfying, but enough to keep you alive. Vegetables come from a small garden beside your house: radishes, burdock root, green onions, beans. You pickle what you can for winter, vegetables packed in salt and rice bran, slowly souring in ceramic jars. Protein is scarce. Fish, when you can get it, dried, salted, or fermented into a pungent paste. Wild game is technically restricted to the aristocracy, but a rabbit caught in a snare doesn't announce itself. Insects are eaten in season, grasshoppers roasted over coals, bee larvae plucked from hives. Buddhist prohibitions against killing animals spread slowly, unevenly. The elite proclaim their vegetarianism, while servants discreetly prepare game. Common people eat what they can find. Hunger is seasonal. Late spring, before the first vegetables mature, is called the grass-eating season. You forage for wild plants, fern shoots, mugwort, anything green. Children's bellies swell. The old and sick grow weaker. A good harvest means survival. A bad one means watching your family waste away while you count the days until the next planting. Your child has been coughing for 3 days. Last night the fever began. You try the remedies your mother taught you: ginger tea to warm the body, a poultice of crushed herbs on the chest, prayers to the local kami, offerings of rice and water at the small shrine behind your house. If the illness worsens, you might seek a healer, an old woman in the next village who knows the medicinal plants, who can read the signs in a patient's complexion and pulse. Her treatments are mysterious: bitter teas, acupuncture with bone needles, chanted formulas that invoke the Buddha's protection. In the capital, Chinese-trained physicians serve the aristocracy. They study ancient texts, prescribe elaborate herbal compounds, and debate the balance of yin and yang in the body. These services are far beyond your reach. Epidemic diseases strike without warning. Smallpox arrives in waves, killing thousands, leaving survivors scarred for life. The court orders prayers and rituals. Temples ring their bells continuously. Nothing helps. You wrap your child in quilted cloth and sit through the night, watching the small chest rise and fall, willing each breath to continue. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Your spiritual life is layered like sediment. The oldest layer is the worship of kami, spirits that inhabit mountains, rivers, trees, and ancestors. You approach the kami with offerings of rice, sake, and cloth. You observe purity rituals, avoiding death and blood before festivals. The kami are not distant gods, but local presences, as real as the mountain behind your village. Above this layer sits Buddhism, now deeply rooted among the elite. The great temples of Nara house thousands of monks who chant sutras for the spiritual protection of the state. Annual ceremonies invoke the Buddha's blessing on the emperor and the harvest. Buddhist ideas about karma and rebirth begin to filter into common understanding. You are told that your current life reflects deeds in past lives. Suffering is not random, it is earned. This is both comforting and terrifying. New Year's rituals blend both traditions. You visit the local shrine to pray to the kami for health and prosperity. You also visit the Buddhist temple to honor your ancestors and accumulate merit. Astrology, divination, and geomancy govern important decisions. No major building begins without consulting the stars. No journey starts on an unlucky day. Every aspect of life is wrapped in ritual precaution. In 794 CE, the capital moves again, this time to Heian, modern Kyoto. The reasons are partly practical. Nara's powerful Buddhist temples have become too influential in politics. The new capital will keep them at arm's length. Heian is larger than Nara, laid out on an even grander grid. The imperial palace dominates the north. Aristocratic mansions spread across the central districts. Markets, workshops, and the homes of commoners fill the southern reaches. For the next 4 centuries, Heian will be the undisputed center of Japanese civilization. If you are lucky enough to be born into the aristocracy, the top few hundred families that dominate the court, your life is one of extraordinary refinement. If you are anyone else, you serve the vision of refinement. Imagine for a moment that you are born into the aristocracy. Your childhood is spent learning Chinese poetry, calligraphy, and music. You memorize the classics. You practice the koto until your fingers ache. You learn to combine colors in your robes according to seasonal conventions, so intricate that a single mistake marks you as uncultured. Your days follow ritual patterns. You rise late. Early rising is considered vulgar. You attend court ceremonies, exchange poems with friends, and pay calls on relatives and patrons. Every gesture, every phrase is evaluated. Marriage is political. Your father negotiates with other families. You may never meet your spouse before the wedding. Among the high nobility, polygamy is common. Your husband maintains relationships with multiple women, visiting each in turn. Your rank determines everything. The height of your carriage, the color of your robes, your seat at banquets, the size of your land grants. You spend your life navigating a maze of etiquette and rivalry. Outside your mansion, the city is filthy and dangerous. But you rarely step outside. You travel in covered carriages, the blinds drawn. The common people are shadows in your peripheral vision. Darkness falls differently for the rich and poor. In an aristocratic mansion, servants light oil lamps and braziers. The rooms glow with soft, flickering light. Incense burns constantly, not just for fragrance, but to mark the hours. Special blends timed to smolder at precise rates. You play the koto or compose poetry, your brush moving across paper in the orange lamplight. Visitors come after dark. A suitor approaches your veranda, announced by the rustle of silk. You speak through a screen, faces hidden, voices low. If his poem pleases you, you might allow a glimpse of your sleeve, a carefully chosen color that signals your mood. Romance unfolds in shadows and suggestion. In the commoners' quarters, night is simply darkness. You cannot afford lamp oil. Fires are dangerous. The wooden city burns regularly. You sleep when the sun sets, rising with the first grey light. The streets after dark belong to no one trustworthy. Thieves, drunks, and demons. The aristocracy believes all three roam freely once the gates close. Guards patrol the palace district. Everyone else locks their doors and waits for dawn. Festivals bring light to the darkness. Lanterns line the streets during Obon, guiding ancestral spirits home. Bonfires burn at New Year. For a few nights each season, even the poor can see their city shine. Clothing in Heian, Japan is identity made visible. An aristocratic woman wears the junihitoe, the 12-layered robe, though the actual number of layers varies. Each layer is a different color, visible at the sleeves, hem, and collar. The combinations follow strict seasonal rules: wisteria shades in late spring, maple tones in autumn, snow white over red in winter. A woman who wears autumn colors in summer is not merely unfashionable, she is spiritually tone deaf. The weight of these robes is considerable. Court women move slowly by necessity, their garments trailing behind them in rivers of silk. The most elegant barely seem to move at all, carried by servants in elaborate palanquins. Men dress more simply but no less carefully. The color and cut of a man's robe announce his precise rank. To wear purple without authorization is a crime. To appear at court in informal dress is social death. Commoners wear rough hemp or ramie, undyed or in dull browns and blues. Laws prohibit the lower classes from wearing silk, bright colors, or elaborate patterns. Your clothing marks your place in the hierarchy before you speak a single word. You own perhaps 2 garments, one for daily wear, one for festivals. You wash them rarely. Cloth wears out faster than dirt bothers you. In winter, you layer what you have and shiver anyway. The Heian period produces some of history's greatest literature, and much of it is written by women. Murasaki Shikibu serves at court as a lady-in-waiting and writes the tale of Genji, a 1,000-page novel of love, loss, and court intrigue. It is, by many accounts, the world's first novel. Sei Shonagon writes The Pillow Book, a collection of lists, observations, and sharp-edged anecdotes. She catalogues things that are embarrassing, things that give a pleasant feeling, things that are tiresome. These women write in Japanese, using the native script called kana. Men, seeking prestige, write official documents and serious literature in Chinese. But it is the women's writing in kana that captures the inner life of Heian culture. If you are a woman at court, your life is constrained but not without agency. You receive callers from behind a screen. You judge suitors by the elegance of their poems. You develop intimacies through exchanged letters, each one a test of literary skill. A poorly written poem can end a relationship. A brilliant one can begin it. Outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. You sleep in the outer corridors, cold seeping through thin walls. Outer corridors, cold seeping through thin mats. When your lady composes poetry by lamplight, you hold the lamp. When she travels by carriage, you walk alongside in the mud. Your name appears in no records. Court diaries mention servants rarely, and then only to complain about their incompetence. Murasaki Shikibu notes when a lady's servants are poorly trained. She does not wonder about their lives. You were likely sold into service as a child, your family too poor to feed you. Or you were born into a servant household, your position hereditary. The distinction between servant and slave is often unclear. What is clear is that you own nothing, decide nothing, and exist to make others comfortable. Some servants rise. A woman who catches a lord's eye might bear his children and gain a small measure of status. A man who proves trustworthy might become a steward, managing estates and handling money. These are exceptions. Most servants live and die in the margins, their names unrecorded, their faces forgotten. The shining world of Heian floats on their backs. While the court composes poetry, the provinces drift into neglect. The Ritsuryo system collapses under its own weight. Tax collection becomes sporadic. Provincial governors, appointed from the capital, often never visit their territories at all. They appoint deputies, who appoint sub-deputies, each taking a cut. Land that was supposed to be redistributed accumulates in the hands of aristocrats and temples. Peasants commend their fields to powerful patrons in exchange for protection from taxes. These private estates, shoen, become islands of immunity, outside the reach of the central government. If you farm a shoen, you answer to the estate steward, not the emperor. You pay your dues to the local manager. You never see the distant owner, an aristocrat in Kyoto or a temple in Nara, who collects the final share. The government in Kyoto knows the system is failing. Edicts are issued, reforms attempted. None succeed. The capital is consumed by its own pleasures. The countryside fends for itself. The road stretches before you, rutted and muddy from last week's rain. Japan's highway system, impressive by the standards of the age, connects the capital to the provinces. Post stations provide fresh horses for official messengers. Checkpoints monitor movement. You need papers to travel legally, your identity and purpose recorded by board officials. If you are a commoner, you walk. Horses are expensive, carriages unthinkable. A journey of 100 kilometers takes a week, sleeping in cheap inns or under trees, eating whatever you can carry or buy. The official postal system moves messages with remarkable speed. Urgent news can travel from Kyushu to the capital in days, passed from rider to rider along relay stations. Private citizens have no such luxury. A letter to a distant relative might take weeks, if it arrives at all. Pilgrimages punctuate the year. Common people walk to famous temples, Kumano, Ise, the great monasteries of Nara, seeking blessings, healing, or simply escape from the drudgery of village life. The roads fill with travelers, merchants, monks, bandits, wandering entertainers, refugees from famines and wars. Travel transforms you. You return home with stories, objects, and ideas from places your neighbors will never see. You also return exhausted, footsore, and grateful for your own mat to sleep on. In the provinces, a new kind of power emerges. Local strongmen accumulate land, followers, and weapons. They call themselves bushi, warriors. They are originally managers of estates, hired muscle to protect property and collect rents. Gradually, they become masters rather than servants. These warriors develop their own codes of conduct, their own skills, their own loyalties. They fight on horseback, wielding bows and later curved swords. They owe allegiance to local lords, who owe allegiance to higher lords, in chains of personal obligation. The court, when it notices the warriors at all, regards them with contempt. Rough provincials, useful for dirty work but unfit for civilized society. This is a mistake. By the late 11th century, the great warrior clans, Taira and Minamoto, are the true powers in the land. The court summons them to settle disputes, to suppress rebellions, to fight each other. Each conflict increases their power. The emperor still reigns, but he no longer rules. You were born into a warrior household in the eastern provinces. At 7, you began training with a wooden sword. At 12, you drew your first real bow. Now, at 20, you ride with your lord's retinue, one of several dozen mounted warriors who answer his call. Your equipment is your family's treasure, a suit of lamellar armor, lacquered plates laced together with silk cords. A curved sword made by a smith whose name your grandfather knew. A bow taller than you are, capable of punching through armor at close range. You practice constantly. Archery from horseback, hitting targets at full gallop, twisting in the saddle to shoot behind you. Sword work for when the arrows run out. Wrestling for when you're unhorsed. You are, above all, an athlete. Combat is terrifying and exhilarating. You identify yourself by shouting your name and lineage before engaging. Honor matters more than surprise. You seek out worthy opponents, enemies whose defeat will enhance your reputation. Killing farmers brings no glory. Between campaigns, you manage your small estate, collect rents from tenants, and train the next generation. Your sons will ride where you ride. Your daughters will marry into allied families, sealing bonds in blood. The court in Kyoto sends elegant commands that your lord mostly ignores. Power flows from the sword, not the brush. You know this. The courtiers are only beginning to understand. Your life has not changed much since your ancestors planted rice 1,000 years ago. You rise before dawn. You work the fields until your hands crack. You eat millet, barley, and whatever vegetables survive the season. Rice is for taxes and landlords. The estate you work has passed through many hands. The original owner, an aristocrat in Kyoto, sold his share to a temple. The temple appointed a steward. The steward hired a manager. Everyone takes a portion. What remains for you shrinks each generation. Bandits roam the roads between villages. Former soldiers, displaced farmers, desperate men. The estate manager hires guards, warriors who struck through the village, demanding food and deference. When the Minamoto and Taira clash for control of the realm, you barely notice. The names mean nothing to you. Only the effects. Requisitioned grain, burned storehouses, conscripted sons. You pray to the kami, you pray to the Buddha, you endure. Your life bears no resemblance to the poetry-writing ladies of Heian. You are a farmer's wife in a village 3 days' walk from the capital. You wake before dawn to start the fire and boil water. You pound rice, mend clothing, tend the garden, carry water, and watch children, your own and others. Your hands are rough, your back bent from decades of labor. Marriage came at 15, arranged by your parents for a small bride price, a few bolts of cloth, some tools. Your husband is neither cruel nor kind, simply exhausted. You share a house smaller than a noble lady's closet. Childbirth happens at home, assisted by the village midwife. You squat on the packed earth floor, gripping a rope hung from the rafters. If the birth goes well, you return to work within days. If it doesn't, you are buried beside the path outside the village. You have borne 6 children, 3 survived. This is ordinary. Religion offers comfort. You visit the local shrine, leave small offerings, pray for your children's health. A traveling monk once spent a night in your village, chanting sutras and promising that devotion to Amida Buddha would bring rebirth in the Pure Land. You say the Buddha's name when the work grows hard. It helps, somehow. Your name appears in no records. History will never know you existed, but you existed. The earth shakes without warning. You are in your house when the tremor begins, a low rumble, then violent shaking. Roof beams groan, pottery shatters. You crawl toward the door, the floor bucking beneath you. Outside, people scream. A temple bell rings wildly, struck by the swaying of its tower. Earthquakes are facts of life in Japan. The islands sit where great plates of the earth grind against each other. Every generation experiences major quakes. Some are catastrophic. The earthquake of 869 generates a tsunami that kills thousands along the northern coast. The records survive. The dead do not. Fire is more common and nearly as deadly. Heian cure burns repeatedly. Wooden buildings, open flames, narrow streets creating corridors of fire. When the wind rises, entire districts vanish overnight. The court evacuates. The poor lose everything. Flood comes with the summer rains. Rivers swell and burst their banks. Rice paddies become lakes of muddy water. A season's work disappears in hours. You cannot prepare for disaster, only endure it. You rebuild what you can with what remains. You tell yourself the kami are angry, or the age is cursed, or karma is inescapable. You plant again. You build again. What else is there? The night is full of presences you cannot see. Wandering spirits of the dead, those who died violently, those who were not properly mourned, roam the darkness. They can possess the living, cause illness, drive people mad. When a courtier falls ill for no apparent reason, exorcists are summoned. Monks chant through the night, commanding the spirit to depart. Demons lurk at crossroads, in abandoned buildings, at the boundaries between settled land and wilderness. The Oni have horns and fangs, carry iron clubs and devour the unwary. You do not travel alone after dark. You do not speak their names aloud. Foxes and tanuki are shapeshifters, capable of assuming human form to trick and deceive. That beautiful woman you saw at dusk might have been a fox in disguise. The merchant who cheated you might not have been human at all. The court employs specialists, onmyoji, who divine fortunes, identify unlucky directions, and prescribe ritual precautions. Before any important action, they are consulted. Move your residence on an unlucky day, and misfortune follows. Begin a journey in an inauspicious direction, and you may never return. This is not superstition to you, it is simply how the world works, a world crowded with powers beyond human control, requiring constant vigilance and endless ritual to navigate safely. In 1180, open war erupts between the Taira and Minamoto clans. The conflict will last 5 years and transform Japan forever. If you are a warrior, you ride into battles that will become the stuff of legend. Ichi no Tani, Yashima, Dan no Ura. You watch the Taira fleet destroyed in the Straits of Shimonoseki, the child emperor drowned by his grandmother rather than captured. If you are a farmer, you watch armies march through your village, stripping the fields of food, pressing young men into service. You hide your grain in pits. You send your daughters to relatives in the mountains. The Minamoto triumph in 1185. Their leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, does something unprecedented. He does not move to Kyoto. He does not seek court titles. He establishes his headquarters in Kamakura, far to the east. He is granted the title Sei Taishogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo. He will govern the warriors. The emperor will perform rituals. The two systems will coexist, uneasily, for 700 years. The war ends. The dead do not return. In the villages, women wait for husbands and sons who will never come home. Fields lie fallow. There are not enough hands to work them. Famine follows fighting, as it always does. You eat bark and roots. You watch neighbors waste away. The warriors who survive divide the spoils. Loyal retainers receive estates confiscated from the defeated. New names appear in the provincial registers. Old names vanish. The hierarchy reshuffles, winners rising, losers erased. In Kyoto, the court continues its ceremonies, pretending nothing fundamental has changed. The emperor still performs rituals, aristocrats still compose poetry, but everyone knows where real power lies now. The warriors will not relinquish what they have taken. The temples pray for the war dead, from both sides, for karma does not distinguish between victors and vanquished. Memorial services multiply, donations flow. The religious establishment, adept at adapting, finds new patrons among the military elite. You rebuild your house with salvaged timbers. You plant rice in fields still scarred by army camps. You tell your grandchildren about the war, the soldiers who came through, the uncle who never returned. The stories will pass into legend, embellished with each generation, until the truth is unrecoverable and only the emotions remain. The battlefield grows quiet. Days after the fighting ends, Villagers creep back to the fields where armies clashed. The ground is churned mud, trampled grass, broken arrows half buried in the soil. Armor plates lie scattered like fallen leaves. The bodies remain. Some are warriors still gripping their swords. Others are horses collapsed where they fell. The smell reaches the road long before the field itself. You do what you can. A shallow grave if there is time, a mound of stones if there is not. Often there are too many. Monks travel between the villages, chanting for the restless dead. They say the spirits of those killed violently cannot easily leave this world. Without prayers they wander. You bow your head as the sutras echo across the field. You hope they find peace. Months pass. The land does not forget. A rider arrives bearing a document stamped with an unfamiliar seal. The estate you have worked for years now belongs to someone else, a warrior rewarded for loyalty during the war. You do not meet this new lord. You meet his steward. The taxes change. The rules change. The harvest must now supply men who carry swords instead of men who write poetry. Rice travels east toward Kamakura rather than west toward Kyoto. To you, the difference feels small and enormous at the same time. You still wake before dawn. You still plant seedlings in flooded fields. You still pray for rain at the shrine. But the authority that governs your life now wears armor. Children grow up hearing different stories now. Where once the court praised elegance and restraint, new tales celebrate courage, loyalty, and the warrior's death. Traveling storytellers recite the battles of the Genpei War in market squares and temple courtyards. They speak of heroic charges, desperate duels, and warriors calling out their names before striking. The tales grow with each telling. Young boys practice with wooden swords in dusty yards. Fathers who survived the war teach them how to ride, how to draw a bow, how to face death without hesitation. The ideals of the court do not vanish, but another code is rising beside them. Years pass, and the memory of the war settles slowly into daily life. Roads once travelled by silk-robed courtiers now carry mounted retainers. Provincial officials send reports not only to Kyoto, but eastward to Kamakura, where the new military government watches over the realm. The emperor still reigns. The shogun now governs. For most people, the shift reveals itself gradually, in new taxes collected, in garrisons established near important roads, in unfamiliar officials speaking with the quiet authority of the warrior government. You plant rice. You mend tools. You raise children who will grow up in a Japan different from the one you were born into. The old world has not disappeared, but its center has moved. And with that movement, an age quietly draws to its close. The establishment of the Kamakura shogunate marks, by most reckonings, the end of ancient Japan. What began with Jomon hunters making rope-marked pottery ends with armored warriors on horseback deciding the fate of the realm. 14,000 years, countless generations, a culture that absorbed ideas from the continent and transformed them into something entirely its own. The gods remain, the rice paddies remain, the emperors remain, at least in name, but power has shifted from the court to the camp, from the brush to the sword. Walk the streets of Kyoto today, and you walk where Heian aristocrats composed poetry. Visit Nara, and you stand where monks chanted sutras for the soul of an empire. Climb into the mountains, and you find shrines where people still leave offerings for kami worshipped since the Jomon. Ancient Japan does not feel ancient, it feels present. The obsession with seasonal awareness, cherry blossoms in spring, maple leaves in autumn, descends directly from Heian court culture. The emphasis on ritual precision, on aesthetic refinement, on the sadness of impermanent things, all of it flows from these centuries we have traversed tonight. The social hierarchies have shifted, but the pattern remains. Those at the top see themselves as cultured and refined. Those at the bottom endure and adapt. The Jomon potter shaping clay by firelight. The Yayoi farmer standing knee-deep in flooded paddies. The labourer hauling dirt for a keyhole tomb. The monk copying sutras by candlelight. The servant holding a lamp while her lady writes poetry. The warrior shouting his name before battle. The farmer hiding grain from passing armies. These are the people who built ancient Japan, not emperors and empresses alone, but the millions who worked, suffered, worshipped, and died over 14,000 years. If there is one truth about ancient Japan, it is this: the majority of people who ever lived there left no record. We have the poetry of Lady Murasaki, but not the songs of the women who grew the rice that fed her. We have the tomb of the emperor, but not the names of the workers who hauled the earth. We have the Buddha's golden face, but not the faces of those who mined the ore. History remembers the powerful, archaeology hints at the rest, and imagination bridges the gap. For 14,000 years, people woke on these islands, fed their families, buried their dead, and hoped for a better tomorrow. Some of those tomorrows came, most did not, and that, perhaps, is the truest history of all. Thank you for watching History and Chill. If you made it to the end, you're truly dedicated, and I appreciate you. Like and subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment about where in the world you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next one. Let the modern world return, but carry a little of the past with you.